Now we have a decent basic button, but let's add a few details to kind of finish it off. We can add pretty much whatever we want to this button. Bitmap graphics, vector graphics, even text. So let's go up to our layer menu up here at the timeline. I'm going to add a new layer, and we'll give this a text label. And it's always good to name our layers since we want to know where everything goes. I'm going to switch over to my text tool, and I think I'm going to type white text, so we'll change the color first. I'm going to stick with classic and static text since we only need a one-word label. And I want something nice and blocky, so I'm going to go with Arial Black. Now, don't worry if you don't have that font on your system. You can choose whatever font you want. I know 10 points is going to be too small, so I'll make that a little bit bigger, but we can always adjust that again later if we need to. And I'm going to work with centered text here. Now I'm just going to click, and we'll start typing. I want the label on my text button to be News, and I'm going to put it in all caps. Now that is a little big, but I'll just switch back over to my normal selection tool, and that allows me to change the properties of the text without having to select the individual characters. I can just go right over here to the size menu, and I'll drop it down so that it fits inside of our button. Then we can center it up, and our button has a nice label. Now notice the timeline is still working the same way it normally does. When I created a new layer, it added the first keyframe in the up frame, and just like in a normal timeline, it usually adds frames right up to the end of the current timeline. And that means my text is going to be here in the over and the down frames as well. We can move our playhead around and see the dark blue with the light text, and we can see here that our text isn't changing, but just the background is. Let's test our button. I'm going to go out to Test Movie, and we can see that we get the color change on the rollover. Even the click is working. So adding more graphic elements to your button isn't going to cause any problems at all. Now, of course, there are some other things we can do outside of the button to give it a little pizzazz. Let me go back to Scene 1. Now, we've got our button right here on the stage, just like any other symbol. I'm going to click on it, and we can see over in our properties that we have access to position and size, color effect, things like tinting and alpha. Let me close those two up. And let's take a look at our filters down here at the bottom. We've used a couple of these before. I create a new filter by using the icon down in the bottom corner, and I can pick from one of the filter settings, and I'm just going to go for a quick bevel. Now we can see the settings we can play with in the bevel. I'm getting a dark shadow on the bottom and kind of a white highlight on the top of my button. I've got a strength setting and a quality setting. Now, bumping up to either medium or high will actually give you better detail in the rendering of the shadow, but it will take a little bit longer on slower machines. I'm going to drop the strength down just so it's not quite so overwhelming. Maybe down to about 60% or so. If you wanted to, you could also change the angle and the distance, but I'm thinking that looks pretty good for our button. Let me click away from it here, and we can see that it kind of gives it a nice raised look. And what's really neat is that's going to work for all of the settings inside the button as well. Let's test our movie with this new filter setting. There's my button, and we can still see that we're getting a nice rollover and a click. And both of those states have the filter applied to them as well, since we applied it to the entire button. In addition to our news button, I also wanted a weather and sports button, and it would probably be good if it looked just like this one so that they matched. Of course, I don't want to do all that work again, so what we can do is go over to our library where our button is stored, and we can make some copies of it. There's our news button in the library, and if we just select it, we can go up to the Options menu in the library. Now, this is actually full of all kinds of different things that you can do, and you might have noticed that every single panel has an Options menu. Some of them aren't quite as full as this, but they will give you some other settings that you can play with. The one I'm looking for here is right up here under Duplicate. Now, that's going to create a copy, and it automatically names it, but I'm going to rename this one Weather Button. We do get a choice for the type, but notice the registration's already been set because we're copying the previous button that we already made. So let's just click OK, and let's make one more duplicate. I'll go back to News, bring up my Options pull-down menu, and choose Duplicate once again. And this one we'll call the Sports button. Now, I've got two new buttons in here. I can just drag them out and use them whenever I need to. I'll place them right down here below news. And of course, they still say news because we haven't changed that. But we know we can just double click on any symbol on the stage. It'll open it up, and there we can go right into our text label. I'll just double click and that'll switch me into my text tool. We can select news and replace it with weather. Since that same text field stays on the screen for 3 frames, we only have to change it one place. Let me just click away and make sure it's centered up right. That looks pretty good. I'll go back to scene 1 and let's change our other button. We'll double click. I'll double click again to get inside the text field. Select the text and type sports. We can click again on scene 1 and we've got our buttons relabeled. Now I just want to use the same filter setting. Once again, I can just apply a filter and try to remember what the settings were. But if we go over to our normal selection tool and we select our news button, we can not only see the filter property, but down here with the little clipboard icon, we can also copy that selected filter as well. Now that just copies the filter settings, but it copies every change that we've made down in here. Now let me click on my weather button. We can see it doesn't have any filters applied to it, but if I go back down to my clipboard icon, you can see that it now says paste, and we can drop the exact same filter right on that button. Let's do it for the last button as well. I can just paste again, and now we've got all 3 set up. It might be nice if I arranged them a little bit too. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key, select the weather button and the news button, and that way I've selected all 3 of them. We'll go up to my Align panel, and I'm going to make sure that Align to Stage is off because I just want to align these to each other. I'll just use a center align, and that'll straighten them all up vertically. And then I can use the space option down here, and that will actually adjust it so that they have even spacing between them. We'll click away, and now our interface looks pretty good.